Success is not an accident. It is the result of deliberate choices repeated consistently until they become habits. And those habits form the invisible architecture of our lives, shaping our destiny in ways we often don't even realize. And this is why Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People has endured for decades as one of the most influential books in the world. Because it does not simply offer trendy hacks or quick fixes, it offers timeless principles that apply universally. Whether you are a student searching for direction, a professional climbing the corporate ladder, or a parent striving to raise children with integrity, and in this cinematic journey we will explore each of these 7 habits in depth, not as abstract theories but as practical tools you can apply immediately, because effectiveness is not about speed or efficiency alone, it is about aligning your actions with your values, ensuring that the ladder you are climbing is leaning against the right wall. And to hook you into this journey, I want you to imagine your own future 5 years from now. Picture yourself waking up with clarity, energy, and purpose. Imagine being healthier, wealthier, and more fulfilled. Imagine having stronger relationships and a deeper sense of meaning. Now contrast that with the alternative, being stuck in the same patterns, frustrated by the same obstacles, and feeling like life is passing you by. The difference between those two futures lies in the habits you choose today. And Covey challenges us to imagine our own funeral, asking what we want people to say about us. Do we want to be remembered as kind, impactful, disciplined, visionary, or do we risk being remembered as someone who wasted potential? This exercise forces clarity and reminds us that life is short and every day counts. So as we begin this journey together, commit to not just listening but acting. Because as Covey himself said, to learn and not to do is really not to learn, to know and not to do is really not to know. And throughout this video you will hear stories of transformation, practical exercises to apply, and commentary that connects these habits to modern life. So stay with me, because by the end of this series you will not only understand the 7 habits, you will know how to live them, and that knowledge, applied consistently, will change your life forever. Now let's go deeper. Because the real hook is not just the promise of change but the realization that you already have the power within you. You are not a victim of circumstances, you are the architect of your destiny, and this video is your blueprint. So imagine the cinematic opening scene. A sunrise over a bustling city, symbolizing new beginnings. The camera zooms in on individuals starting their day, some rushing, stressed, reactive, others calm, intentional, proactive, and the difference between them is not luck, it is habits. And as the narration continues you begin to see yourself in these characters, realizing that you too have the choice to shift from reactive to proactive, from scattered to focused, from ordinary to effective, and that is the promise of this journey. We will explore stories of people who transformed their lives by applying these habits, like the young professional overwhelmed by deadlines who shifted from urgency to importance, or the entrepreneur who built a thriving business by thinking win-win, or the parent who rebuilt trust with their children by seeking first to understand. And each of these stories will remind you that effectiveness is not reserved for the elite, it is available to anyone willing to practice these principles. And along the way you will be challenged with exercises, like writing your personal mission statement, identifying your circle of influence, or practicing empathetic listening, because this is not passive entertainment, it is active transformation. And the hook is simple yet profound. If you commit to this journey, your life will change, not overnight, but steadily, habit by habit, choice by choice, until one day you wake up and realize you have become the highly effective person you once admired from afar. And that realization will be the most powerful moment of your life, so let's begin. Habit 1, be proactive, is the foundation of all effectiveness, and it begins with a simple but profound realization. You are not a product of your circumstances, you are a product of your choices, and while you cannot control everything that happens to you, you can always control how you respond, and that response, repeated over time, becomes the habit of proactivity, which separates highly effective people from those who drift through life reactively, blaming luck, blaming others, or blaming the environment. Covey explains that proactive people focus on their circle of influence, the things they can actually change, rather than wasting energy on their circle of concern, the things they cannot control. And this distinction is critical, because when you invest energy in your circle of influence, it expands, but when you waste energy on your circle of concern, your influence shrinks, leaving you powerless and frustrated. So let's make this vivid. Imagine 2 people stuck in Traffic, one honks angrily, curses the government, blames the city planners, and arrives at work drained and bitter, while the other calmly accepts the situation, turns on an audiobook, and uses the time to learn something new. Same traffic jam, same external reality, but two completely different experiences, because one chose to be reactive and the other chose to be proactive, and this is the essence of habit 1. Covey emphasizes that proactivity is more than positive thinking, it is the recognition that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom to choose, and that choice defines our character, our effectiveness, and ultimately our destiny. So when someone insults you, you can choose to retaliate or to remain calm. When you face a setback, you can choose to give up or to persist. When you encounter uncertainty, you can choose fear or courage. And each choice builds the habit of either reactivity or proactivity, and over time those habits shape your life. Let's explore a story. A young manager constantly complained about his team's lack of motivation, saying they were lazy, uncommitted, and impossible to lead. But after reading Covey's work, he realized he was focusing on his circle of concern, blaming his team, instead of his circle of influence, his own leadership style. So he shifted his focus, began setting clear expectations, offered recognition for achievements, and modeled proactive behavior himself, and within months, his team transformed, not because they magically changed, but because he changed, and his proactive choices expanded his influence, proving Covey's principle in action. Now let's make this practical for you, the viewer. Take a sheet of paper and draw two circles, one large labeled circle of concern and one smaller inside it labeled circle of influence. Then list all the things that worry you, the economy, politics, other people's opinions, global events, in the outer circle, and then list the things you can actually control, your habits, your health, your relationships, your learning, in the inner circle, and commit to focusing your energy on the inner circle, because that is where effectiveness begins. And here's the secret. As you consistently act on your circle of influence, it grows, you gain more confidence, more trust, more opportunities, and suddenly things that once seemed beyond your control begin to shift. Not because the world changed, but because you changed. Covey also warns against the language of reactivity, phrases like I can't, I have to, he makes me so mad, which all imply that your life is controlled by external forces, whereas proactive language says I choose, I prefer, I will, which reclaims your power. So pay attention to your words, because they reveal your mindset, and by changing your language you change your life. Another powerful exercise is to identify one recurring situation where you feel reactive. Maybe it's dealing with a difficult colleague, or facing criticism, or handling stress, and consciously pause before responding. Remind yourself that between stimulus and response lies your freedom, and then choose a proactive response, and repeat this until it becomes natural, because that is how habits are built, through repetition and conscious choice. Covey also connects proactivity to responsibility, literally the ability to respond. And he argues that highly effective people recognize that they are responsible for their lives, not their parents, not their boss, not society, and this responsibility is liberating, because it means you are not a victim, you are a creator. And once you embrace this mindset, you stop waiting for life to happen and start making life happen. Let's consider another story. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, endured unimaginable suffering in concentration camps. Yet he discovered that even when everything was taken from him, his freedom, his possessions, his family, one thing remained: the freedom to choose his attitude, and that choice gave him meaning and strength to survive. And later he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, which echoes Covey's principle that proactivity is the ultimate human freedom. And if Frankl could choose his response in such horrific conditions, then surely we can choose our response in daily challenges, and this realization should inspire us to live proactively. Now let's tie this back to your journey. If you want to become highly effective, habit 1 is non-negotiable, because without proactivity the other habits collapse. You cannot begin with the end in mind if you believe you are powerless. You cannot put first things first if you think your schedule is controlled by others. You cannot think win-win if you see life as a zero-sum game dictated by circumstances. So proactivity is the foundation, the root from which all other habits grow. And the more you practice it, the stronger you become. Here's a challenge for you. For the next 7 days, keep a journal of moments when you feel reactive. Write down the situation, your initial reaction, and then rewrite it with a proactive response, and at the end of the week reflect on how different your life feels, because this simple practice will train your mind to pause, reflect, and choose, and over time it will rewire your brain for proactivity. Remember, effectiveness is not about controlling the world. It is about controlling yourself, and when you master yourself, you master your destiny. So as we close habit 1, let this message sink in. You are not a victim, you are not powerless, you are not defined by circumstances, you are defined by your choices, and every choice is a chance to practice proactivity. So choose wisely, choose intentionally, and choose to be proactive, because that choice will change everything. Habit 2, begin with the end in mind, is about vision, clarity, and purpose, and it challenges us to stop living reactively and start living intentionally, because effectiveness is not about speed, it is about direction. And if you climb the ladder of success only to discover it is leaning against the wrong wall, then all your effort has been wasted. So Covey asks us to imagine our own funeral, to picture what we would want people to say about us, our character, our contributions, our legacy. And this exercise forces us to confront the ultimate question: what kind of life do we want to live? Because once you define the end, you can design the path. And this habit is about creating a personal mission statement, a written declaration of your values, goals, and vision, which becomes the compass that guides your daily decisions. And without this compass, you risk drifting aimlessly, reacting to circumstances, and chasing goals that do not truly matter. Imagine a ship without a destination. It may sail fast, but it will never arrive anywhere meaningful, and that is how most people live, busy but directionless, efficient but ineffective. So habit 2 is the antidote. It is about defining your destination before you start the journey, and this principle applies to every area of life, whether personal, professional, or spiritual, because clarity of vision transforms chaos into order, confusion into confidence, and distraction into focus. Let's explore a story. A young executive worked tirelessly, climbing the corporate ladder, achieving promotions, earning bonuses. But one day he realized he had neglected his family, his health, and his passions, and though he was successful by external measures, he felt empty inside, because his ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. So he paused, reflected, and wrote a mission statement that prioritized relationships, health, and meaningful work. And from that day forward he made decisions aligned with that vision, and his life transformed, proving Covey's principle that beginning with the end in mind is the key to true success. Now let's make this practical for you, the viewer. Take a notebook and write down what you would want people to say about you at your 80th birthday celebration. What kind of parent, friend, leader, or citizen do you want to be remembered as? And then translate those reflections into a mission statement, a concise declaration of your values and goals, and review it daily, because this statement will serve as your compass, guiding you through distractions, temptations, and challenges. Covey also emphasizes the importance of roles, because we all play multiple roles in life: parent, spouse, professional, community member, and effectiveness means balancing these roles in harmony, not neglecting one for the sake of another. So when you begin with the end in mind, you define success in each role, and then design habits that align with those definitions. Another powerful exercise is visualization, because the mind responds to vivid images. So close your eyes and visualize your ideal future. Imagine your career flourishing, your relationships thriving, your health strong, your spirit fulfilled, and then ask yourself, what habits must I practice today to make that vision real? Because vision without action is fantasy, but vision with action is destiny. Covey also warns against living by default, letting society, culture, or other people define your goals, because if you do not define your own end, someone else will, and you may spend your life chasing goals that do not truly matter to you. So habit 2 is about reclaiming ownership of your life, defining your own success, and living by design, not by default. Let's consider another story. A teacher felt burned out, overwhelmed by grading papers and administrative tasks. But after reflecting on her mission, she realized her true purpose was to inspire students. So she redesigned her schedule to spend more time mentoring and less time on bureaucracy, and her passion returned, her students thrived, and her career regained meaning, proving that clarity of vision transforms not only outcomes but also energy and motivation. Now let's tie this back to your journey. If you want to become highly effective, habit 2 is essential, Because without vision you cannot prioritize, you cannot focus, you cannot lead. And you risk wasting your life on trivial pursuits, but with vision you gain clarity, confidence, and courage, and every decision becomes easier, because you simply ask, does this align with my mission? And if the answer is yes, you act. If the answer is no, you decline, and this simple filter saves you from distraction and regret. Here's a challenge for you. Write your personal mission statement this week, keep it short but powerful, and then share it with someone you trust, because accountability strengthens commitment. And review it daily, because repetition ingrains vision into your subconscious, and soon your decisions will naturally align with your mission, transforming your life from reactive to proactive, from scattered to focused, from ordinary to extraordinary. Remember, effectiveness is not about doing more, it is about doing what matters. And habit 2 ensures that you always know what matters. So begin with the end in mind, define your vision, write your mission, and live intentionally. Because that is the path to true success. Habit 3, put first things first, is where vision becomes action. Because once you have embraced proactivity and defined your mission, the next challenge is execution, and execution requires prioritization, discipline, and the courage to say no to distractions, because life constantly bombards us with urgent demands, emails, notifications, meetings, crises. But effectiveness is not about reacting to urgency. It is about focusing on importance, and Covey illustrates this with his famous time management matrix, which divides tasks into 4 quadrants. Quadrant I, urgent and important, like deadlines and emergencies. Quadrant 2, important but not urgent, like planning, relationship building, exercise, and personal growth. Quadrant 3, urgent but not important, like interruptions, phone calls, and trivial meetings. And Quadrant 4, neither urgent nor important, like mindless scrolling, gossip, and time-wasting activities. And Covey argues that highly effective people spend most of their time in Quadrant 2, because that is where growth, renewal, and long-term success are built. Yet most people live in Quadrant I and 3, constantly firefighting or chasing distractions. And this is why they feel busy but unfulfilled, efficient but ineffective. So Habit 3 challenges us to consciously prioritize Quadrant 2, to put first things first, to schedule our priorities instead of prioritizing our schedule. And this requires courage, because saying yes to what matters means saying no to what doesn't. And many people struggle with this, fearing they will disappoint others. But Covey reminds us that every yes is also a no, and every no is also a yes. So if you say yes to endless meetings, you are saying no to family time, health, and personal growth. And if you say yes to scrolling social media, you are saying no to reading, learning, and building your future. So effectiveness requires the courage to choose wisely. Let's explore a story. A busy executive felt constantly overwhelmed, working late nights, missing family dinners, and burning out. Until he applied Habit 3, he began each week by identifying his top priorities aligned with his mission statement, scheduled them first, and then fit everything else around them. And suddenly his life shifted. He exercised regularly, spent quality time with his children, and still achieved professional success, not because he worked more hours, but because he worked on what mattered most. And this is the essence of Habit 3. Now let's make this practical for you, the viewer. Take a notebook and list your weekly tasks, then categorize them into Covey's 4 quadrants, and you will likely discover that most of your time is spent in Quadrant I and 3, so commit to shifting at least 20% of your time into Quadrant 2, by scheduling exercise, planning, learning, and relationship building, and protect that time fiercely, because it is the foundation of long-term effectiveness. Covey also emphasizes delegation, because putting first things first is not about doing everything yourself, it is about focusing on your highest priorities and empowering others to handle the rest. So learn to delegate tasks that are urgent but not important, and free yourself to focus on what truly matters. Another powerful exercise is the big rocks metaphor. Imagine a jar that represents your time. If you fill it with sand and pebbles first, trivial tasks, there will be no room for big rocks. Important priorities. But if you place the big rocks first, then add pebbles and sand, everything fits. So the lesson is clear. Schedule your big rocks first, your health, your relationships, your mission-driven projects, and then let the smaller tasks fill the gaps. Because if you don't, the small things will consume your life, leaving no room for the big things. Let's consider another story. A student constantly procrastinated, cramming for exams, feeling stressed, and achieving mediocre results. Until she applied habit 3, she began studying consistently in quadrant 2, reviewing notes daily, preparing ahead, and suddenly her grades improved, her stress decreased, and her confidence soared, proving that putting first things first transforms not only outcomes but also peace of mind. Now let's tie this back to your journey. If you want to become highly effective, habit 3 is essential. Because without prioritization your vision remains a dream, but with prioritization your vision becomes reality, and every day becomes a step toward your mission. So ask yourself daily, what is the most important thing I can do today that will move me closer to my vision? And then do it first, before distractions, before emergencies, before anything else, because that is how effectiveness is built, one priority at a time. Here's a challenge for you. For the next week, identify your top 3 priorities each morning, write them down, and commit to completing them before anything else. And at the end of the week reflect on how much progress you made, because this simple practice will train your mind to focus on importance, not urgency, and over time it will transform your life. Remember, effectiveness is not about being busy, it is about being purposeful, and habit 3 ensures that you always put first things first. So embrace this habit, schedule your priorities, protect your quadrant 2, and live intentionally, because that is the path to true success. Habit 4, think win-win, is about shifting from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of abundance, and it teaches us that life is not a zero-sum game where one person's success must come at the expense of another, but rather a collaborative journey where mutual benefit creates trust, synergy, and long-term success, because highly effective people understand that competition has its place, but cooperation builds empires. And Covey emphasizes that win-win is not about compromise, where both sides lose something, it is about creative collaboration, where both sides gain, and this requires a fundamental shift in how we see the world, because most people operate from a scarcity mindset, believing there is only so much success, so much recognition, so much opportunity, and therefore they must fight, hoard, or manipulate to get their share. But effective people embrace abundance, believing there is enough success for everyone, enough recognition to go around, enough opportunity to be shared. And this belief transforms relationships, because when you think win-win, you stop seeing others as threats and start seeing them as partners, and this builds trust, loyalty, and influence. Let's explore a story. 2 business partners faced a conflict over profit distribution. One wanted a larger share, the other felt undervalued, and tensions rose. But instead of fighting, they applied win-win thinking. They asked, how can we structure this so both of us feel valued? And they discovered that by reinvesting profits into growth, both would benefit more in the long run, and this solution strengthened their partnership, proving Covey's principle in action. Now let's make this practical for you, the viewer. The next time you face a negotiation, whether with a colleague, a spouse, or a friend, pause and ask, how can we create a solution where both of us win? And this simple question reframes the conversation from conflict to collaboration, and suddenly new possibilities emerge, because win-win requires creativity, empathy, and courage, but it always produces better outcomes. Covey also warns against the 3 alternative paradigms: win-lose, where one person dominates and the other resents; lose-win, where one person sacrifices and feels exploited; and lose-lose, where both sides suffer out of spite. And he argues that none of these paradigms produce long-term success, because they destroy trust, damage relationships, and breed resentment, whereas win-win builds trust, strengthens relationships, and creates lasting success. So if you want to be highly effective, you must embrace win-win as your default paradigm. Another powerful exercise is to reflect on your recent interactions. Ask yourself, did I approach them with win-win, win-lose, or lose-win? And then commit to shifting toward win-win, because awareness is the first step to change. Let's consider another story. A teacher faced conflict with students over classroom rules. Instead of imposing authority, she invited them to co-create the rules, ensuring both her needs for order and their needs for autonomy were met, and the result was a cooperative classroom where students felt ownership and respect, proving that win-win transforms even small interactions. Now let's tie this back to your journey. If you want to become highly effective, habit 4 is essential, because success without relationships is hollow, and relationships without trust are fragile. But win-win builds both success and trust, creating a foundation for influence, leadership, and collaboration. So ask yourself daily, Am I approaching this interaction with a win-win mindset? And if not, how can I shift? Because this simple reflection will transform your relationships. Here's a challenge for you. For the next week, in every negotiation or conflict, consciously practice win-win. Write down the situation, the initial positions, and then brainstorm creative solutions where both sides benefit. And at the end of the week, reflect on how different your interactions felt, because this practice will train your mind to see abundance, not scarcity, and collaboration, not competition, and over time it will rewire your brain for win-win thinking. Remember, effectiveness is not about defeating others, it is about uplifting others while uplifting yourself. And habit 4 ensures that you always think win-win, so embrace this habit, cultivate abundance, and build trust, because that is the path to true success. Habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood, is perhaps the most transformative of all the habits because it addresses the foundation of human relationships, communication, and Covey argues that most people listen with the intent to reply rather than the intent to understand. They filter everything through their own perspective, preparing their response while the other person is still speaking. And as a result, they miss the deeper meaning, the emotions, and the unspoken needs behind the words. But highly effective people practice empathetic listening, which means listening not just with the ears but with the eyes and the heart, listening to understand feelings, context, and perspective. And only after truly understanding do they seek to be understood. Because influence flows from empathy, not from argument, and trust is built when people feel heard, not when they feel lectured. Covey explains that communication is the most important skill in life, and yet most people spend years learning how to read, write, and speak, but almost no time learning how to listen, and this imbalance creates endless conflict, misunderstanding, and broken relationships. So Habit 5 challenges us to reverse this pattern, to prioritize listening over speaking, understanding over persuading, empathy over ego, and this shift transforms not only personal relationships but also professional leadership. Because when people feel understood, they open up, they trust, they collaborate, and they become receptive to influence, whereas when they feel ignored or dismissed, they resist, they withdraw, and they sabotage. Let's explore a story. A father constantly argued with his teenage son, lecturing him about grades, discipline, and responsibility. But the son grew increasingly rebellious, until one day the father applied Habit 5, he stopped lecturing and simply listened, asking questions, reflecting feelings, and trying to understand his son's perspective, and for the first time the son opened up, sharing his struggles, fears, and dreams, and the father realized that his son did not need lectures, he needed empathy, and from that day forward their relationship transformed, proving Covey's principle in action. Now let's make this practical for you, the viewer. The next time you are in a conversation, resist the urge to interrupt or prepare your response. Instead, focus entirely on understanding. Ask clarifying questions, reflect back what you hear, and validate feelings. And only after the other person feels fully understood should you share your perspective. Because this sequence, understand first, then be understood, is the key to influence. Covey also warns against 4 common listening styles: ignoring, pretending, selective listening, and attentive listening, which all fall short of empathy, because they focus on words but not feelings, whereas empathetic listening goes deeper. It seeks to understand meaning, emotion, and context, and this requires patience, humility, and genuine care, but it always produces better outcomes. Another powerful exercise is to practice reflective listening. When someone shares something, respond by paraphrasing their message in your own words, and ask if you understood correctly, and this simple technique builds trust and clarity, because it shows you are truly listening. Let's consider another story. A manager faced conflict with her team. Morale was low, productivity was declining, and she tried to motivate them with speeches and incentives, but nothing worked, until she applied Habit 5. She held listening sessions, asked open-ended questions, and validated concerns, and suddenly the team felt heard, their morale improved, and productivity soared, proving that empathetic listening is the foundation of leadership. Now let's tie this back to your journey. If you want to become highly effective, Habit 5 is essential. Because success is not just about individual achievement, it is about collaboration, and collaboration requires trust, and trust requires understanding. So ask yourself daily, am I listening to understand or to reply? And if the answer is to reply, pause and shift, because this simple reflection will transform your relationships. Here's a challenge for you. For the next week, in every conversation, consciously practice empathetic listening. Write down the situation, the person, and what you learned by listening deeply, and at the end of the week reflect on how different your interactions felt, because this practice will train your mind to prioritize understanding, and over time it will rewire your brain for empathy. Remember, effectiveness is not about winning arguments, it is about building trust, and habit 5 ensures that you always seek first to understand, then to be understood. So embrace this habit, cultivate empathy, and transform your communication, because that is the path to true success. Habit 6, synergize, is about the magic that happens when people work together in a spirit of cooperation, creativity, and trust, because synergy means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And Covey argues that highly effective people recognize that differences are not threats but opportunities, that diversity of perspectives, talents, and experiences create solutions that no individual could achieve alone. And this habit challenges us to move beyond compromise, where each side gives up something, and instead embrace collaboration, where each side gains something new, because synergy is not about settling, it is about creating, and when practiced, it transforms relationships, teams, and organizations, producing breakthroughs that would be impossible in isolation. Covey explains that synergy requires valuing differences, because most people fear or resist differences, they prefer agreement, conformity, and sameness, but highly effective people see differences as fuel for creativity, because when two people with different perspectives collaborate, they can combine strengths, compensate for weaknesses, and generate innovative solutions. And this principle applies everywhere, from families to businesses to communities, because synergy is universal. Let's explore a story. A company faced a major challenge, declining sales and fierce competition. The marketing team wanted to cut prices. The product team wanted to innovate, and the finance team wanted to reduce costs, and tensions rose. But instead of fighting, they applied habit 6. They listened to each other, valued differences, and brainstormed together, and they discovered a creative solution, redesigning the product to reduce costs while adding new features, and marketing it as a premium value offering. And this solution revived sales, proving Covey's principle in action. Now let's make this practical for you, the viewer. The next time you face a conflict, instead of insisting on your way or compromising, pause and ask, how can we create a third alternative that is better than either of our positions? And this simple question reframes the conversation from competition to collaboration, and suddenly new possibilities emerge, because synergy requires openness, humility, and creativity, but it always produces better outcomes. Covey also warns against defensive communication, where people protect their egos and resist differences, because this destroys synergy, whereas supportive communication, where people listen, validate, and encourage, builds synergy. So if you want to practice habit 6, cultivate supportive communication, and watch how your relationships transform. Another powerful exercise is to intentionally seek out people who are different from you, in background, perspective, or skills, and collaborate with them, because differences create synergy, and sameness creates stagnation. So embrace diversity as a source of strength. Let's consider another story. A family faced conflict over vacation plans. The parents wanted relaxation, the children wanted adventure, and compromise seemed inevitable, but instead they applied habit 6. They brainstormed together and discovered a destination that offered both relaxation and adventure, and the result was a vacation that satisfied everyone, proving that synergy transforms even small conflicts into creative solutions. Now let's tie this back to your journey, if you want to become highly effective. Habit 6 is essential, because success is not just about individual achievement, it is about collective achievement, and collective achievement requires synergy. So ask yourself daily, am I valuing differences or resisting them? Am I seeking creative collaboration or settling for compromise? And if the answer is compromise, pause and shift, because this simple reflection will transform your interactions. Here's a challenge for you. For the next week, in every conflict or collaboration, consciously practice synergy. Write down the situation, the differences, and the creative solution you discovered, and at the end of the week reflect on how different your interactions felt, because this practice will train your mind to see differences as opportunities, and over time it will rewire your brain for synergy. Remember, effectiveness is not about uniformity, it is about unity in diversity. And habit 6 ensures that you always synergize, so embrace this habit, cultivate creativity, and build collaboration, because that is the path to true success. Habit 7, sharpen the saw, is about renewal, balance, and continuous growth, and it reminds us that effectiveness is not a one-time achievement but a lifelong process, because just as a saw becomes dull with use and must be sharpened to remain effective, our bodies, minds, hearts, and spirits become worn down by the demands of life and must be renewed regularly to remain sharp. And Covey explains that highly effective people invest in self-renewal across 4 dimensions: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual, because neglecting any dimension leads to imbalance and burnout, while nurturing all 4 creates resilience, energy, and long-term effectiveness. The physical dimension involves caring for the body through exercise, nutrition, rest, and stress management, because without health, effectiveness collapses, and Covey emphasizes that small, consistent habits like daily walking, balanced meals, and sufficient sleep sharpen the physical saw, giving us energy to pursue our mission. The mental dimension involves continuous learning, reading, writing, and problem-solving, because the mind is like a muscle that grows with use, and highly effective people never stop learning. They read widely, reflect deeply, and challenge themselves intellectually, sharpening the mental saw to remain adaptable and innovative. The emotional, social dimension involves building relationships, practicing empathy, and cultivating emotional intelligence, because effectiveness is not just about individual achievement, it is about collaboration, and collaboration requires trust, and trust requires emotional connection. So highly effective people invest in relationships, listen empathetically, and nurture social bonds, sharpening the emotional saw to remain connected and influential. The spiritual dimension involves connecting with values, purpose, and meaning, whether through meditation, prayer, reflection, or time in nature, because the spirit is the source of vision and inspiration, and without spiritual renewal, life becomes hollow. So highly effective people regularly reconnect with their deepest values, sharpening the spiritual saw to remain centered and purposeful. Let's explore a story. A successful entrepreneur worked tirelessly, building a thriving business, but neglected his health, relationships, and inner life, and eventually he burned out, feeling empty despite external success. Until he applied Habit 7, he began exercising daily, reading inspiring books, spending quality time with family, and meditating regularly, and within months his energy returned, his relationships flourished, and his business thrived even more, proving Covey's principle in action. Now let's make this practical for you, the viewer. Take a notebook and write down one habit in each of the 4 dimensions that you can practice daily. For physical, maybe walking 30 minutes. For mental, maybe reading 20 pages. For emotional, maybe calling a loved one. For spiritual, maybe journaling or meditation, and commit to practicing these habits consistently, because sharpening the saw is not about occasional renewal, it is about daily renewal, and this consistency builds resilience and effectiveness. Covey also warns against the trap of neglecting renewal, because many people focus so much on productivity that they neglect self-care, believing they do not have time to sharpen the saw. But this is a paradox, because neglecting renewal reduces effectiveness, while investing in renewal increases effectiveness. So sharpening the saw is not a luxury, it is a necessity, and highly effective people understand this. Another powerful exercise is to schedule weekly renewal rituals, like a family dinner, a nature walk, or a personal retreat, and protect this time fiercely, because renewal requires intentionality, and without intentionality, life's demands will consume all your time. Let's consider another story. A teacher felt exhausted, overwhelmed by grading and teaching. Until she applied Habit 7, she began exercising, reading inspiring literature, and practicing mindfulness, and suddenly her energy returned, her teaching improved, and her students thrived, proving that renewal transforms not only outcomes but also joy. Now let's tie this back to your journey. If you want to become highly effective, Habit 7 is essential, because without renewal the other habits collapse. Proactivity fades, vision blurs, priorities slip, relationships weaken, and collaboration fails. But with renewal the other habits are sustained, strengthened, and deepened. So ask yourself daily, am I sharpening the saw? And if not, how can I start? Because this simple reflection will transform your life. Here's a challenge for you. For the next week, practice one renewal habit in each dimension daily, and at the end of the week reflect on how different you feel, because this practice will train your mind to prioritize renewal, and over time, it will rewire your brain for balance and resilience. Remember, effectiveness is not about working harder, it is about working smarter, and working smarter requires renewal. So habit 7 ensures that you always sharpen the saw. So embrace this habit, cultivate balance, and invest in growth, because that is the path to true success. Image prompt. Now that we have explored all 7 habits in depth, the final step is integration, because knowledge without application is wasted, and effectiveness is not about practicing habits in isolation but about weaving them together into the fabric of daily life. So habit 9, if you will, is the integration of the 7, the conscious decision to live proactively, guided by vision, disciplined by priorities, committed to mutual benefit, grounded in empathy, empowered by synergy, and sustained by renewal. And this integration transforms the 7 habits from abstract principles into a lifestyle, a way of being, a character ethic that defines who you are and how you live. Because Covey reminds us that effectiveness is not about personality techniques or quick fixes, it is about character, and character is built by consistent practice of principles. So let's reflect on how these habits interconnect. Habit 1. Be proactive, gives you the power of choice. Habit 2. Begin with the end in mind, gives you vision. Habit 3. Put first things first, gives you discipline. Habit 4. Think win-win, gives you collaboration. Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, gives you empathy. Habit 6. Synergize, gives you creativity. And habit 7. Sharpen the saw, gives you renewal, and together they form a holistic system of effectiveness, because proactivity without vision is aimless. Vision without discipline is fantasy. Discipline without collaboration is lonely. Collaboration without empathy is shallow, empathy without synergy is limited, and synergy without renewal is unsustainable. But when all 7 are practiced together, they create a balanced, powerful, and enduring life. Let's explore a story. A young professional applied the habits one by one, first becoming proactive, then defining a mission, then prioritizing, then building win-win relationships, then listening empathetically, then synergizing with colleagues, and finally renewing himself. And within a few years he transformed from an average employee into a respected leader, not because he mastered techniques but because he lived principles. And this is the essence of integration. Now let's make this practical for you, the viewer. Begin each day with a short reflection. Ask yourself, how can I practice each habit today? Maybe by choosing a proactive response to a challenge, reviewing your mission statement, prioritizing your top tasks, seeking win-win in a negotiation, listening empathetically in a conversation, synergizing with a team, and renewing through exercise or meditation. And write these intentions down, because writing creates commitment. And at the end of the day, reflect on how you practice the habits, because reflection creates growth. And over time this daily practice will integrate the habits into your character, making them automatic, natural, and enduring. Covey also emphasizes the importance of balance, because effectiveness is not about excelling in one area while neglecting others, it is about harmony across all dimensions of life. So integration means practicing the habits not only at work but also at home, not only in public but also in private, because true effectiveness is holistic and character is consistent. Another powerful exercise is to create a weekly plan that aligns with your mission statement. Schedule your priorities. Identify opportunities for win-win. Plan conversations where you will practice empathetic listening. Design projects that require synergy, and schedule renewal activities. And review this plan weekly, because consistency builds integration. Let's consider another story. A parent applied the habits in family life, being proactive in discipline, defining a family mission, prioritizing family time, seeking win-win in conflicts, listening empathetically to children, synergizing in decisions, and renewing through shared rituals. And the result was a strong, loving, and resilient family, proving that integration transforms not only careers but also homes. Now let's tie this back to your journey. If you want to become highly effective, integration is essential, because practicing habits sporadically produces limited results, but practicing them consistently produces transformation. So ask yourself daily, am I living the 7 habits? And if not, how can I start? Because this simple reflection will transform your life. Here's a challenge for you. For the next month, create a habit tracker. With 7 columns, 1 for each habit, and each day mark how you practiced each habit, and at the end of the month reflect on your progress, because this practice will train your mind to integrate the habits, and over time it will rewire your brain for effectiveness. Remember, effectiveness is not about perfection, it is about progress, and integration ensures that you are always progressing, always growing, always becoming. So embrace this integration, live the 7 habits daily, and build a life of character, vision, and legacy, because that is the path to true success. And so we arrive at the conclusion of our journey through the 7 habits of highly effective people, a journey that began with the recognition that success is not a matter of chance but a matter of choice, that habits form the invisible architecture of our lives, and that by consciously choosing principles of effectiveness we can transform not only our outcomes but our character, our relationships, and our legacy. And as we reflect on each habit we see how they weave together into a holistic system of growth. Habit 1 taught us to be proactive, to reclaim our power of choice and stop living as victims of circumstance. Habit 2 taught us to begin with the end in mind, to define our vision and mission so that our ladder leans against the right wall. Habit 3 taught us to put first things first, to prioritize importance over urgency and discipline our time around our values. Habit 4 taught us to think win-win, to embrace abundance and build relationships of trust and mutual benefit. Habit 5 taught us to seek first to understand, then to be understood, to listen empathetically and communicate with influence. Habit 6 taught us to synergize, to value differences and create solutions greater than the sum of their parts. And Habit 7 taught us to sharpen the saw, to renew ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually so that we can sustain effectiveness for a lifetime. And together these habits form a complete framework, a blueprint for living a life of character, vision, and legacy, and the true power of this framework lies not in theory but in practice, because effectiveness is not about what you know, it is about what you do, and what you do consistently becomes who you are. So the challenge now is integration, to weave these habits into the fabric of daily life, to practice them not sporadically but consistently, not only at work but also at home, not only in public but also in private, because true effectiveness is holistic and character is consistent. Imagine your life 1 year from now if you practice these habits daily. Imagine waking up with clarity, energy, and purpose. Imagine facing challenges with confidence and resilience. Imagine building relationships of trust and collaboration. Imagine achieving goals aligned with your deepest values. And imagine feeling balanced, renewed, and fulfilled. This is not fantasy, it is destiny. If you commit to practice, because the habits are universal, timeless, and proven. And they will work for anyone who works them. So let this conclusion be not an ending but a beginning, the beginning of your journey to effectiveness, the beginning of your transformation, the beginning of your legacy, because as Covey reminds us, to learn and not to do is really not to learn, to know and not to do is really not to know. So do not leave these habits on the page or in this video, take them into your life, practice them daily, reflect on them weekly, and live them consistently. And soon they will become second nature, shaping your character, guiding your decisions, and defining your destiny. Let's explore a final story. A young professional once felt lost, overwhelmed by distractions, reactive to circumstances, and uncertain of his future. But after embracing the 7 habits he transformed, he became proactive, defined his mission, prioritized his time, built win-win relationships, listened empathetically, synergized with colleagues, and renewed himself regularly, and within a few years he became a respected leader, a loving parent, and a fulfilled individual, not because he was perfect but because he practiced principles. And his story is not unique, it can be your story too, if you commit to the habits, because effectiveness is not reserved for the elite, it is available to anyone willing to practice principles. And that is the promise of this journey. So as we close, let this message sink in. You are not a victim, you are not powerless, you are not defined by circumstances, you are defined by your choices, and every choice is a chance to practice effectiveness. So choose wisely, choose intentionally, and choose to live the 7 habits, because that choice will change everything. And when you look back years from now, you will see that the habits did not just change your outcomes, they changed your character, they changed your relationships, they changed your legacy, and that is the true measure of success. Not wealth or fame, but Character and contribution. So go forth and live the 7 habits. Sharpen your saw, synergize with others, listen empathetically, think win-win, prioritize your mission, define your vision, and be proactive. And in doing so you will not only achieve success, you will achieve significance. And that is the greatest gift you can give yourself and the world. And so we arrive at the conclusion of our journey through the 7 habits of highly effective people, a journey that began with the recognition that success is not a matter of chance but a matter of choice, that habits form the invisible architecture of our lives, and that by consciously choosing principles of effectiveness we can transform not only our outcomes but our character, our relationships, and our legacy. And as we reflect on each habit we see how they weave together into a holistic system of growth. Habit 1 taught us to be proactive, to reclaim our power of choice and stop living as victims of circumstance. Habit 2 taught us to begin with the end in mind, to define our vision and mission so that our ladder leans against the right wall. Habit 3 taught us to put first things first, to prioritize importance over urgency and discipline our time around our values. Habit 4 taught us to think win-win, to embrace abundance and build relationships of trust and mutual benefit. Habit 5 taught us to seek first to understand, then to be understood, to listen empathetically and communicate with influence. Habit 6 taught us to synergize, to value differences and create solutions greater than the sum of their parts. And Habit 7 taught us to sharpen the saw, to renew ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually so that we can sustain effectiveness for a lifetime. And together these habits form a complete framework, a blueprint for living a life of character, vision, and legacy. And the true power of this framework lies not in theory but in practice, because effectiveness is not about what you know, it is about what you do, and what you do consistently becomes who you are. So the challenge now is integration, to weave these habits into the fabric of daily life, to practice them not sporadically but consistently, not only at work but also at home, not only in public but also in private, because true effectiveness is holistic and character is consistent. Imagine your life 1 year from now if you practice these habits daily. Imagine waking up with clarity, energy, and purpose. Imagine facing challenges with confidence and resilience. Imagine building relationships of trust and collaboration. Imagine achieving goals aligned with your deepest values. And imagine feeling balanced, renewed, and fulfilled. This is not fantasy, it is destiny. If you commit to practice, because the habits are universal, timeless, and proven. And they will work for anyone who works them. So let this conclusion be not an ending but a beginning, the beginning of your journey to effectiveness, the beginning of your transformation, the beginning of your legacy, because as Covey reminds us, to learn and not to do is really not to learn, to know and not to do is really not to know. So do not leave these habits on the page or in this video, take them into your life, practice them daily, reflect on them weekly, and live them consistently. And soon they will become second nature, shaping your character, guiding your decisions, and defining your destiny. Let's explore a final story. A young professional once felt lost, overwhelmed by distractions, reactive to circumstances, and uncertain of his future. But after embracing the 7 habits he transformed, he became proactive, defined his mission, prioritized his time, built win-win relationships, listened empathetically, synergized with colleagues, and renewed himself regularly, and within a few years he became a respected leader, a loving parent, and a fulfilled individual, not because he was perfect but because he practiced principles. And his story is not unique, it can be your story too, if you commit to the habits, because effectiveness is not reserved for the elite, it is available to anyone willing to practice principles. And that is the promise of this journey. So as we close, let this message sink in. You are not a victim, you are not powerless, you are not defined by circumstances, you are defined by your choices, and every choice is a chance to practice effectiveness. So choose wisely, choose intentionally, and choose to live the 7 habits, because that choice will change everything. And when you look back years from now, you will see that the habits did not just change your outcomes, they changed your character, they changed your relationships, they changed your legacy, and that is the true measure of success. Not wealth or fame, but character and contribution. So go forth and live the 7 habits. Sharpen your saw, synergize with others, listen empathetically, think win-win, prioritize your mission, define your vision, and be proactive. And in doing so you will not only achieve success, you will achieve significance. and that is the greatest gift you can give yourself and the world.